His parents didn't scream. They just left a note. Leave the key. You're no longer welcome here. No explanation. No goodbye hug. But the real reason behind that coldness isn't what you think. Want to know what he did after getting kicked out of the house? Stick with us for this unexpected story. Ethan Miller was the kind of son every American parent would brag about on Facebook if they used social media. But Robert and Linda didn't. They didn't brag because in their minds, true pride didn't need to be spoken. All it took was seeing Ethan, and you'd get it. He was their only child. Born in the bitter cold of an Illinois winter, but he grew up gentle like a June breeze. Never caused trouble, never rebelled, never talked back. Linda often told her friends at the women's club, he's been well-behaved since day one, like he was born to do the right thing. Robert wasn't much of a talker. But the way he looked at Ethan every time his son brought home a report card said it all. He'd pictured it for years. Ethan in a charcoal suit, standing in a courtroom, delivering lines like honey to a jury. A Miller following in the footsteps of a Miller. And Ethan, right on cue, chose to study law at the prestigious Northwestern. Not because he loved it, but because it was the right thing to do. You sure about this? A friend asked him during freshman year. Yeah, my parents will be happy, he said. Short, cold, but that sure started to crack by sophomore year. Every class, every case study left him numb. While others debated passionately, he was just counting down the minutes. He began to realize he was living out a script that had already been written. Every chapter, every line, none of it was his. Every time he came home, Linda would ask, "Are you hungry? I made your favorite stew." He'd sit down and eat, out of habit. "Your dad says there's an internship opening at the firm next week. You should think about it." "Yes," Ethan replied. He always said yes, even when, deep down, a small part of him wanted to scream, "Mom, I don't even like stew. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want this life." But he didn't scream. He just smiled, cleaned his plate, did the dishes, then went back to his student apartment like a dressed-up ghost. Robert still checked his grades, still nodded with approval, still gave him a light tap on the shoulder like a silent badge of honor. One evening, as the family watched the news about a high-profile case, Linda blurted out, "One day, Ethan will be just as famous. Don't forget your mom when you're on TV." Ethan smiled, but his heart froze. Inside him, there were no courtrooms, no briefcases, just blueberry tarts he used to secretly bake on weekends, the way the soft dough blended with the gentle tang. The relief he felt watching them rise in the oven. No one knew. It was his little secret, and the only thing that felt real. Once, Linda found a printed recipe he'd tucked under his pillow. She frowned. "What kind of nonsense are you messing with?" "I was just curious. A boy doing this stuff, just throw it away." That line stuck in Ethan's head like a nail that wouldn't come out. A boy doing this stuff. From that day on, he stopped baking. But every night, he dreamed of dough, of blueberries, of melting butter. Dreams more peaceful than any law class he'd ever sat through. Ethan never said a word. No one asked. He just kept studying, kept nodding, kept being the good kid. The whole Miller family believed Ethan would follow in Robert's footsteps, would take the Miller name even further. What they didn't know was that every step Ethan took down that path pulled him further away from himself. But the more he tried to live up to their expectations, the louder the part of him inside screamed to be heard. It all started one night in March. He was sitting alone in his student apartment, under the dim glow of a desk lamp, law books stacked high, his head heavy like stone, absent-mindedly scrolling through YouTube to kill time, and for some reason, the first video that popped up was how to make beginner blueberry tarts. He clicked play. A middle-aged man was calmly walking through each step, from rolling the dough to pouring in the filling. Slow, precise. Every movement felt like it was designed to heal. Ethan watched the whole thing. Then another video. Then another. He couldn't stop. The very next day after his afternoon class, he went out and bought a mixing bowl, a few basic ingredients, and a bag of frozen blueberries. He stuffed everything into his backpack, tucked it under his coat like he was hiding something he wasn't supposed to have. The shared dorm kitchen was far from perfect. The stove was old, the oven uneven. But he didn't care. For the first time in months, he felt alive. His hands were covered in flour, his face flushed from the heat. After nearly an hour, the oven beeped. The smell of butter, sugar, and sweet tart fruit filled the air. So rich, he sat down, closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to burn the feeling into his blood. His first bite of the tart, edges a little burnt, but the filling soft, sweet enough, tart enough to wake up the dullness of the night, was a revelation. After that, it became a ritual. By day he studied, by night he baked. Sometimes just one batch, sometimes two. He signed up for a night baking class using a fake name to stay under the radar. It was a small class, some homemakers, a retired bakery owner, and a finance major trying to escape his own path. No one knew each other's real names. No one cared. It was just about flour, sugar, and heat. It was the only place he could breathe. One weekend, he went home to visit and brought along a few printed recipes, hoping to squeeze in some practice when he had downtime. He hid them inside a book, tucked between pages, so no one would see. But Linda saw. She was cleaning his room when she dropped a stack of papers, and the recipe pages spilled out onto the floor, photos and all. She picked them up, skimmed through, then called him downstairs. "Ethan, what is this?" "Just some baking recipes. I was messing around for fun." "A boy doing this kind of thing?" Her voice wasn't loud but sharp enough to cut. "I'm not doing anything wrong." "It's not wrong, but is it worth it? All that time you should be studying law and you're doing this?" "I just wanted to try it." She shook her head. "And then what? After trying it, you throw away your whole career? I didn't raise you just to watch you waste your life in a kitchen." He didn't say another word, just took the recipe page, folded it up. She didn't stop him. But the way she looked at him, that was colder than anything he'd ever felt from her. That night, Linda made the stew he used to love. But it tasted like nothing. Like everything was starting to fade, even the most familiar things. The next day, back in his apartment, he pulled out the recipes and laid them on the table. Then he picked them up one by one, read them carefully, and scribbled notes in pencil. He realized this was the first thing he was doing, not to please anyone else. The following week, the baking class announced a new assignment: blueberry tart. His heart skipped. That was the dessert Linda used to make when he was little. Whenever it rained, she'd bake it, and they'd eat it together in front of the TV. A slice of his childhood was the tang of blueberries and a crisp, buttery crust. This time he made it again. But his way. He used less sugar, added a bit more lemon zest. When the tart came out of the oven, the crust was golden, the filling soft but not runny, the smell rich, like a memory brought back to life. He brought one home, hoping to offer his mom a taste, as a way to reconnect. Linda picked it up, took a small bite. "Too sweet," she said. "Waste of time." He nodded, took the tart back, cut the last piece, and ate it right there. No arguing, no explaining, no running away. And in that bite, he heard his own voice clearer than ever before. It was like, finally, a hidden part of him had stepped into the light, even if it did so quietly. The way Linda set the tart down, indifferent, then turned away like it was just a failed recipe, didn't make Ethan angry. It just left him feeling empty, like every effort to reconnect with a piece of his childhood had been quietly rejected. In the weeks that followed, he stopped hiding the fact that he was taking baking classes. He kept going to his night course, kept testing new recipes every Saturday. But on the outside, to his parents, he was still the law student about to graduate, still the son on track to become the next Miller. Until the day he decided to quit. He had taken the internship at the law firm Robert had arranged. 6 weeks, 9 hours a day, a sleek, polished office where everyone spoke like they were reading from a contract. He gave it a real shot, read case files, took notes, tried to memorize the terminology. But the more he worked, the more he felt drained. Every lunch break, he'd step outside, not to eat, just to sit and stare at the bakery across the street. And on day 38, he handed in his resignation. No warning, no asking his dad. He just printed the letter, signed it, and walked out of the office. He felt light. A few days later, he went home. Linda was making dinner, Robert reading the paper. The smell of roast meat lingered in the air. Just another ordinary evening, or so it seemed. "Mom, Dad," he said, "I have something to tell you." Linda turned, still holding the ladle. Robert lowered the paper. "I quit," Ethan said. A beat of silence. Linda spoke first. "Quit? You mean the internship?" "No, all of it. I'm not going into law anymore." Robert looked him straight in the eye. You got fired? No, I quit. I've made up my mind. Made up your mind about what? Robert set the paper down on the table. I want to open a bakery, just a small one, at the weekend market. The silence that followed felt like it sucked the air out of the room. Then, the sound of glass shattering. Robert slammed his hand on the table, and the glass in his hand fell to the floor, breaking into pieces. Linda flinched. Are you out of your mind? He growled. Do you even hear what you're saying? I do. I've thought it through. Robert stepped closer. His eyes were red. I spent years building this reputation, just for you to throw it away and sell pastries to housewives? I don't want this life anymore. Ethan said, his voice strangely calm. I never did. I only did it because you wanted me to. Linda stayed by the stove. Her hands dropped to her sides, the ladle falling to the floor. She didn't look at anyone. You've disappointed me, she said, soft but sharp enough to slice through Ethan's chest. No one said anything after that. Dinner went untouched. That night, Ethan lay in his old bed. The ceiling looked the same, but the room no longer felt warm. Everything was quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the kind of silence that suffocates. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen. Linda was making coffee. Robert wasn't there. She didn't look at him, didn't say good morning, just poured her coffee into a mug and walked out without a word. Ethan poured himself a glass of water and sat at the table. The old tablecloth was still there. The chair still wobbled a little. But there was no smell of breakfast, no voices, no sound of chairs being pulled out, no low hum of the AM radio, just the ticking of the clock. From that day on, no one spoke to him. Linda cooked for two. Ethan made his own meals, washed his own dishes, then went upstairs. Robert came home later than usual. They crossed paths in the house like strangers. No arguments, no shouting, just a silence so heavy it felt haunted. One evening, Ethan came into the kitchen just as Linda was clearing the table. She looked at him for a second, then turned away. Another night, Robert passed him in the hallway without meeting his eyes, like Ethan was invisible. And even though Ethan had once imagined he'd feel relieved after finally telling the truth, the reality was nothing like that. He still baked every night, but in this house, even the smell of butter couldn't cover the cold creeping into his chest. The house had never been this quiet. And never. This unfamiliar. The silence in the house stretched on, 1 week, then 2. Every day, Ethan went to the kitchen for food, washed his dishes, walked down the hallway, all of it feeling like it was happening in a house without people, just bodies going through the motions. He didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't try to force anyone to understand. But each step he took in that house began to feel heavier. He felt like a stranger, like a tenant no one wanted. One Saturday morning, when Ethan came down for a glass of water, his mother wasn't there. On the table sat a folded note, placed next to the spare house key he'd kept since his college days. The note was short. The handwriting was Linda's, familiar, neat, clear, just like the grocery lists she used to stick on the fridge. Ethan, leave the key. You're no longer a part of this home. He stood there holding the note. His heart didn't race. It didn't break. It just went quiet. Like his body had been expecting this for a long time, and now that it had arrived, all it could do was nod and accept it. There were no footsteps in the house. No one came out to explain. No tears. No reasons. He went upstairs, opened the closet, packed a few clothes, some personal things, a stack of baking recipes he'd carefully hidden away. He didn't need much. He knew he wouldn't be coming back. He paused at the kitchen doorway. That space used to be the warmest part of the house. It was where Linda would sit and read while waiting on the stew, where the three of them once laughed when Ethan spilled milk as a kid, where morning light used to fall softly on the wood floor. The smell of coffee hung in the air, and Robert's AM radio played in the background while he shaved. Now it was empty, cold, like all the good memories had been quietly boxed up and cleared out without anyone noticing. Ethan stood there for a moment, not because he was clinging to it, just to remember it one last time, like someone closing up an old shop, knowing that once they turned away, everything behind them would belong to the past. He set the key down on the shelf, didn't wrap it, didn't leave a note. As he stepped out the front door, the rain had started. Not a downpour, just a quiet, early-season rain, soaking into his shoulders, his hair. But that chill made him feel oddly calm. No one came to see him off. No one called his name. There was no tearful mother begging him to stay, no father rushing out with last-minute advice. Just the soft click of the door behind him, the sound of the lock turning tight, and a space opening up behind him. Part relief, part ache. Ethan pulled his coat tighter around his neck and stepped down the porch. The rain didn't stop him, didn't weaken him. If anything, each step through the puddled yard made him feel lighter. Not because he'd escaped, but because at last he knew it was time to go. No more waiting, no more holding on. The house behind him, once a home, was now just a structure with walls and a roof, but no space left for him. As Ethan crossed the street and stepped into the open, uncovered sidewalk, his hand gripped the strap of his backpack. Inside was nothing valuable, just a few baking recipes and a clean set of clothes. But inside him was something stronger than he'd ever felt before. The sense that, for once, he was living true to himself, even if it meant being cast out of the place he used to call home. He didn't cry, didn't bow his head, he just kept walking. Because sometimes the deepest pain isn't being rejected. It's realizing you were never really accepted to begin with. Ethan didn't look back as he passed the last row of houses on the block. The afternoon rain soaked through his shirt, cold, but not enough to stop him. From the moment that door shut behind him, he knew. This path had no return. He rented a small room on the south side of the city, near the bus station. Cheap, quiet, and no one asked too many questions. Just enough space for a bed, a mini electric stove, and a folding table. But to him, it was the first time in his life where the space truly belonged to him. He started by signing up for a small stall at the weekend market. No storefront, no signage. Just a folding table, a simple cloth cover, and a few white trays holding his tarts. Blueberry, apple cinnamon, sometimes with walnuts or toasted coconut. On his first day, he sold 2 tarts. One to a little girl with her grandmother, the other to an older man who stopped because of the smell. At the end of the day, he packed up the leftover trays, staring at them with a weight in his chest like lead. He didn't have a big fridge to store them, and he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. So he ate them, alone, in his tiny room, eating and chewing on the taste of failure. Some days the crust burned. Some days it cracked. Sometimes the rain came hard and knocked over the table. But Ethan still got up at 4 a.m., kneaded the dough by hand, measured out each spoonful of jam, adjusted the sugar for every batch. He wrote customer feedback in a small notebook, crossed out the flavors no one touched, circled the ones people asked about again. He started to recognize a few familiar faces. An elderly woman with silver hair who bought apple tarts every Saturday morning. A young guy with headphones who always asked, "Got anything new today?" A couple who stopped by before hitting the gym, always bought half a tart to split. In the 9th week, a reporter from the local paper came by to buy a tart. Didn't say much, just finished eating, then asked, "Where do you bake?" Ethan pointed to the shared rental kitchen where he still booked hours by the week. The following week, the paper ran a story, the sweet corner that silenced the market for 30 seconds. Readers took notice. Soon, people started asking, "Why don't you open a shop?" Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't ready, not because he feared failure, but because he still didn't know where he belonged enough to call any place a finish line. But each weekend, more people came. Some days, he sold out before 10 a.m. He had to apologize, one by one, to those who arrived too late. One morning, a little kid pouted and said, "I wanted the purple one from last time." Blueberry. For the first time in months, the word made his chest ache, just a little. A year later, Ethan opened a small bakery. Not big, just 2 display cases, a wooden counter, and a few chairs lined up along the wall. Clean, bright, warm enough for people to linger. Fragrant enough to make passers-by turn around. He still woke up at 4 a.m., but this time, not out of fear of messing up, he did it for the simple joy of feeling dough soften in his hands. Every morning, a line formed outside the door. No one knew he was a former law student. No one asked why he only sold sweets and not bread. They just knew the place felt kind, from the smell in the air to the look in the baker's eyes. He never once called home, not out of anger, not out of pride. There just wasn't anything to say. Each night after locking up, he'd stand for a moment, look at the little sign hanging from the wooden frame. Simple, no frills, just the word Ethan's. No fancy tagline, no slogan. But it was real. And it was his. The final days of the year passed in a flurry of warmth and noise inside the bakery. Strings of lights lined the windows, customers picked up boxed orders, and the shop filled with laughter and talk of upcoming parties. Ethan kept up his rhythm, baking sweet tarts every morning. But when he came home on Christmas Eve to a quiet apartment, an emptiness settled in his chest. It was his first Christmas away from home. He opened the cabinet, pulled out an old speaker, and played a song Linda used to listen to every winter. A soft female voice drifted through the room like mist, stirring memories he thought he'd buried deep. Evenings wrapped in blankets watching old movies. His mother's laughter as she zested oranges for holiday cakes. His father carving roast chicken. Always overcutting, always too dry. Ethan hadn't expected to cry, but by the time the song ended, his eyes were already wet. Not from longing, but from grief. Something had died between him and them. No one had called first. No one had said a word to make things right. He stayed silent, and they disappeared from his life like they were never really part of it. He sat at his desk flipping through his notebook, short recipes marked up with pencil edits, and then an idea came to him. Not to reconcile, not to start a conversation, just a quiet way to close the chapter. He decided to send a box of tarts back to the old house. Not the usual kind, not for sale, but a set of 6 small tarts, each with a different flavor. And beneath the paper lining, a hidden note. 6 tarts. 6 things he'd never said. The first tart, dark chocolate with sea salt, bold and heavy, like the years he spent trying to play the part he was assigned. Attached note, I tried my best. The second, lemon tart, bright, tart, but gently fragrant. Like the moment he realized his parents weren't cruel, they just wanted something different. Attached note, I understand your disappointment. The third, raspberry tart, vivid red, sweet with a sting, like the early days of being ignored, cast out, eating burnt tarts for dinner. Attached note, but I'm not sorry. The fourth, peach tart, soft and calm, like the way he smiled at customers, lived simply, steadily in line with himself. Attached note, I'm happy. The fifth, apple cinnamon, one of Linda's old recipes. Ethan made it again from memory, but added a bit of honey to soften the sharpness. Attached note, I forgive you. The last tart, blueberry, the first one he ever made. The one that was once dismissed as too sweet, a waste of time. This time it was perfect, lightly tart, crisp crust, soft filling. Attached note, I'm not coming back. He wrapped each tart carefully. Blue silk paper, a small wooden box, no ribbon, no card. The house address hadn't changed, he'd never forgotten it. He didn't write a sender's name, just the name of the shop, tucked in the corner of the box, Ethan's. The next morning, he took it to the post office himself, waiting in line like everyone else. The air was cold but dry. His face was unreadable, hands steady around the box, like he was carrying a piece of his heart, finally ripened. When it was his turn, he handed over the package, recited the address once. The clerk asked, "Who's it for?" He gave a soft smile and said, "For my old family." No explanation. No need for questions. Walking out of the post office, Ethan didn't look back. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets and headed straight for the bakery. What needed to be done was done. For the first time in a year, he had sent something home. Not an apology, not a plea, but the truth. Sweet, bitter, soft, sharp, just like everything he'd lived through. And now, finally, set in its rightful place. In a box, in a Christmas season, with no regret. 2 weeks after Christmas, on a morning like any other, Ethan was arranging tarts in the display case when the bell over the door rang. A familiar sound, clean, certain, but this time it made his hand freeze midair. The door swung open, and they walked in. Robert stepped in first, Linda half a step behind. Both wore thick coats and scarves, the kind they used to wear every winter. Their shoes carried traces of mud from outside. They didn't say a word, didn't look around, just stood quietly at the counter, as if they weren't entirely sure why they were there in the first place. Ethan said nothing. He didn't flinch. He wasn't cold. He simply finished placing the last batch of tarts onto the tray. There were still a few customers inside. An elderly woman savoring an apple tart, a college student giggling with her friend after biting into the dark chocolate and sea salt. Linda's eyes wandered over the scene, pausing longer when she spotted a little boy dipping a tart into whipped cream, crumbs clinging to his grin. Robert stood tall, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the display case. He looked over each tart, Didn't ask, didn't move, just stood there in silence. 5 minutes passed, long enough to know they were really here. Not by accident, not just passing through. Finally, Robert spoke. His voice was low, somewhere between a compliment and a quiet thought spoken aloud. "These are good." Ethan nodded. No smile, no thank you. Just reached for a blueberry tart, placed it on a porcelain plate and slid it gently across the counter. Linda looked at the tart, that same deep purple, the crust evenly golden. But this time she didn't criticize, didn't say a word. She looked at Ethan, slowly pulled off her gloves, picked up a fork, and cut a piece. Robert didn't touch it. He stood beside her, eyes on the window, where the name Ethan's glowed faintly in the reflection, blurred by the fog of winter breath. No one apologized. No one brought up the box of tarts. No one mentioned last New Year or what had happened. But no one left right away. They sat by the window, not touching, not speaking. Linda finished the tart, every bite. Robert sat still, eyes occasionally wandering, watching the warm yellow lights strung above, the pastry case filled to the brim, the stream of customers coming and going, some calling for takeaway, others asking for extra napkins. And he saw his son, not in a suit, not behind a podium, not holding a legal brief, but as a grown man, doing what he chose and doing it well. Ethan carried on with his work, like every other morning, handing out pastries, nodding to regulars, adjusting the chalk-written menu. But between all those familiar motions, something had quietly changed. For the first time, he didn't have to flinch, didn't have to brace himself to look fine, didn't have to prove anything, because their presence, quiet as it was enough. Enough to know they'd seen, they'd witnessed. Linda set the empty plate back on the counter, gave a small nod. Robert followed, and just before he stepped out the door, he paused, spoke softly, almost like it was meant only for Ethan. "You must be busy." Ethan answered, not fast, not slow. "I'm used to it." The door closed behind them. No promises to stay in touch, no parting words. But he didn't turn around to look, and he didn't need to. Because sometimes not everyone who walks out of your life is a loss. And not every ending needs to be clear, as long as your heart is finally quiet. Some journeys begin with a door slammed in your face. Ethan didn't choose the easy path. He chose the one that was true to himself, even when the cost was silence from the people he loved most. He'd once slept beside an oven because he couldn't afford anywhere else. He'd eaten ruined pastries for dinner. He'd asked himself, more than once, was I wrong to walk away from the person my family wanted me to be? But he kept going, kept waking up before dawn to knead dough, kept testing recipes for the third, fourth, fifth time, kept believing that if something made his heart race, then it was worth chasing, no matter what. Now, every day, Ethan still stands behind his bakery counter, still uses the hands once called a waste to make pastries people come back for, not because they're picture perfect, but because they taste real, just like his life. His parents may not fully understand. They may never say the words, "I'm sorry," but they saw it with their own eyes. That the son they once thought had lost his way through passion and persistence had carved out a place he could truly call his own. Sometimes recognition doesn't come as applause. It comes in a quiet sentence. "These are good." And you'll know, deep down, they've started to understand. Because when you live in alignment with your passion, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how many times you fall, you won't stop. Not because it's a choice, but because it's who you are. It's what you're here for. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give to the past is the person you've become today. Steady, bright, proud. No apologies, no looking back, just moving forward with everything you believe in. Thank you for staying with this story till the end. See you next time.